Welcome to the Lords and Heroes section of my Lizardmen guide. In this video we'll cover the Lords and Heroes of the Lizardmen factions, including campaign and battle, as well as abilities and unique effects. Disclaimer, this guide is based on my personal experiences and opinions and is by no means the definitive way to play the Lizardmen in Mortal Empires. If you have a different strategy or want to add something to mine, please leave a comment down below. Little bonus disclaimer for this one, some of these words are really hard to say, so I apologise in advance for butchering your favourite factions or places. If you'd like to send a complaint, please email uratw@mate.co.uk. With that being said, let's get into the video. Before we get into this guide, I do just want to remind you that there's a giveaway going on. You could win Total War Warhammer 2, the game, for free from me. You don't need to subscribe, you don't need to like, you don't need to do any of that stuff. You just go to the link in the description, put in a little bit of information so I can get in contact with you, and then do any of the entry stuff, and then you'll be entered in the prize draw to win. You do have to not own the game previously, and I will be checking this, so just make sure that you don't, because that's kind of scummy. Right, onto the video. In general, the Lords and Heroes of the Lizardmen are quite strong, with many of them having some of the best mounting options in the game, while also being able to cast a good range of spells. They have some options for flying mounts, but when paired with the fact that only one hero has ranged ability, it becomes extremely situational. The ranged hero you do have is also fairly weak, as they are single targets with no AoE, so are only really useful for going after other characters. Most Lords are also quite slow or weak with no mount, so it becomes essential to unlock them as soon as you can to keep them alive and fighting well. With all that being said, let's get into the Lords. Of course, we're starting off with Mazdamundi of Hexotl. Choosing him and his faction will grant the faction minus 10 relations with most other factions, minus 50% construction cost for Star Chamber buildings, minus 30% right cost, and plus 1 to the Slan Mage capacity. In his army he gets minus 50% upkeep for Temple Guards, and his starting army gets a Feral Bastiladon, some Temple Guards, and some Kroq-Gars. In battle he has access to just one mount, Zlak, who is a legendary ancient Stegodon. He has access to the abilities Shield of Safri, Exorcism, and Roiling Skies. He can also access the spells Harmonic Convergence, Apotheosis, Net of Amnitok, Curse of the Midnight Wind, Arcane Unforging, and Comet of Cassandora. It also goes without saying that he is primarily a spellcaster and should be kept out of melee until he gets Zlak to give him some great damage. Leveling Mazdamundi is pretty standard, as he doesn't have too many unique spells that change the default way of doing things. You obviously get Root Matcher first, and then start going down the red tree to make his army perform better overall. Then I would say the Eldritch line next, as it gets him some good abilities without having to go all the way into the spells. I go right into those after, as his selection doesn't really have any of my favourites in, but are still useful anyway. Finally, you should always get Zlak as soon as you can afford it, as it just elevates Maz to a new level in battle. He has access to 3 missions. First is the Defense at the Fallen Gates, and honestly it's extremely easy once you've got some flying units. It sets you with the task of assisting in defending a choke point that's being held by a smaller Lizardmen force from a reasonable Chaos army. The Chaos army brings 2 Hell Cannons, which are basically the only real threat, as everything else can be chewed up by your melee units. If you bring flying units though, you can just sit behind them and take out both cannons and save a massive amount of damage from hitting your units. The Sunburst Standard of Hexotl is a very useful item for Mazdamundi to have, especially later in the game, as it casts a protective aura around himself and allies, so it's great for use in the front lines. Trespassers of the Crimson Skull is his second unique mission, and this time it's a straightforward assault at a sizable Skaven army. Your army does start quite far away from the enemy, so it's going to take most of your infantry a while to get close. This can be a problem, as the enemy does bring quite a few ranged units, which can do some serious damage if you don't silence them or bring tough as nails infantry. I played this mission using my endgame composition, and had no problems, as my fast units could easily rush up and shut down the enemy ranged units, giving my infantry plenty of time to advance without the threat of bombardment. The Cobra Mace of Mazdamundi provides him with some great bonuses in campaign as well as battle, and makes him a little bit more viable in melee even without Zlak. The Lord Kroak mission is a weird one, as it's available to all Lizardmen factions, so I'll just explain it once here, as it doesn't change anything but location for everyone else. It's actually one of my favourite quest battles I've done so far, as it's a defence rather than an attack, so all you have to do is hold the line against more and more Skaven troops, while Lord Kroak rolls out of bed. He even gives you a nice choke point to pin all the enemy in, while your ranged units rip them to shreds. I did do it with my endgame comp, but this could really be done as soon as you unlock the mission, as long as you have some infantry to hold the line long enough. The Ward is obviously Lord Kroak himself, who, funnily enough, isn't a Lord, he's a legendary hero. I'll go into more depth later, but all I'll say for now is he's going to be pretty great whether you use him in campaign or in an army. Kroq-Gar is up next, and he couldn't be more different from Maz if he tried. He commands the last defenders and grants the faction a huge 10% upkeep reduction for all units, which is a godsend in the early game. His army gets plus 10 leadership, minus 50% upkeep for Saurus and Cold One units, plus 10 leadership and plus 20 armour for Stegodon, Bastillodon, Pterodon and Carnosaur units, and plus 25 ambush success chance. His starting army gets a Cold One Spear Riders unit, some Saurus spears with shields, and a Feral Stegodon. In battle he has the choice of 3 mounts, a Cold One, a Horned One, or Grimlock, his Carnosaur. He's armoured, deals AP damage, and has a bonus against large units, so is great for taking on any mounted lords and heroes the enemy might bring. He also has predatory sensors, so he's very hard to get a flank on without being detected. He has no spells, but does have the abilities Sacred Spawning of Zotal, Deadly Onslaught, and Swiftness of Itzel. Again, when levelling him, you want to start off with the usual Root Marcher, followed by the Red Tree. It's worth picking up any of the Destroy the Race line to help you in any war you're in, as they provide some great bonuses for him and everyone else in battle. Once you can, it's also a good idea to choose a Blessing, as they will again buff everyone in the faction, so it can be very strong. Lastly, I went for the Yellow Tree, as it gives some buffs to Kroak himself. Of course, the mounts can also be unlocked whenever you need them and can afford them, but I generally wait to get Grimlock, as he's just the best and I'd rather not waste the skill points. He has 2 missions as well as Lord Kroak. The Well of Time is a head-on assault against a reasonable Dark Elf army. Again, the enemy brings quite a bit of range damage, so you either need to get to them fast or have units that are tough enough to take it. The enemy force is quite diverse, but there's nothing too extreme with the exception of a Hydra, so it should be very possible with a mid-game army with a couple of monsters. The revered Spear of Tlaxana makes Kroak perform much better in battle and boosts public order faction-wide, so it's a very worthwhile reward. The march on the Fallen Gates is basically the defence, but in reverse and with high elves. You have to push past the choke point and fight uphill against a very varied and quite strong high elf army. Since you're going uphill, it can make a lot of your ranged units ineffective, so this can be a very challenging battle, but with an endgame comp it should be made easier with some fast units to silence the enemy ranged and give your melee time to march up the hill. The Hand of the Gods gives Kroak more bonuses in battle, as well as a bound spell, so it's again really worthwhile and will make Kroak's battles much easier from then on. Tiktaq'to is next up, and he commands the Tlaquah faction. Choosing him will grant the faction Pterodon mounts for all skink heroes, plus 25% campaign line of sight for all characters, and a unique ability for Pterodons. His army gets a 50% upkeep reduction for Pterodon and Ripidactyl riders, as well as plus 10 melee attack for all units when in foreign territory. He starts off with skink skirmishers, Pterodon riders with Fire Leech bowlers, and Cold One riders. In battle, Tik has only 1 mount, the Pterodon, and you don't really have a choice about it, as it's not equipable. He deals AP damage, so he's great for targeting single tough units or characters, but he won't last long if he gets swarmed and can't escape. He also has Vanguard deployment, so can get into the fight that much sooner. He has a Sphere of Tepok that he can drop on enemies that does a great amount of explosive and AP damage to clumps of enemies. Finally, he also has dodge, so can resist some amount of physical and missile damage. He has no spells, but does have the abilities Master of the Skies and Deadly Onslaught. Leveling him is fairly straightforward. Of course, Root Marcher followed by the red line first. The Sphere of Tepok tree is a great second option, as it gets some more bonuses for the whole army rather than just Tik. As usual, the yellow tree is last, as Lord is only 1 unit, so can't carry the battle totally. He only has access to 1 unique mission, the Mask of Heavens. It's a pretty easy initial fight against some Skaven units, with a few more armies appearing as the battle progresses. It should be a fairly simple battle to win, as long as you make sure not to get surrounded and bring enough infantry to wait out the assault. The reward is the Mask of Heavens, and it gives Tik some great bonuses in campaign as well as an active ability in battle. Our final legendary lord is Tehenhauin, who leads the cult of Sotek when he isn't busy being unpronounceable. Choosing him will grant the faction 200% upkeep increase for Saurus infantry and temple guard until stage 1 of the Prophecy of Sotek is complete, and minus 75% cost to the Rite of Sotek, as well as the sacrifices to Sotek I talked about in the campaign section. His army gets plus 10 physical resistance for skink units, plus 10 leadership when fighting Skaven, and plus 3 untainted in the local province. His starting army gets a Salamander hunting pack, red-crested skinks, and an Ark of Sotek Bastillodon. In battle, Tehenhauin has access to 3 mounts, a Horned One, a Ripidactyl, or an Engine of the Gods Ancient Stegodon. He is a spellcaster, so isn't going to be leading many charges, but since he does have Frenzy, it can be useful to get him in to do a bit of damage in melee before he loses any leadership. He's also aquatic, so shouldn't have to worry about moving over any kind of terrain at speed. He has access to all the spells in the Lore of Beast, and has the abilities Wild Heart, Arcane Conduit, and Stand Your Ground. When levelling him, it's again pretty standard with very little deviation. Route Marcher followed by the Red Tree as usual, the Fanatic line next as it gets you some great army bonuses. Then get his spells unlocked before the Yellow Tree, and finally any mount you prefer and can afford, but I would say just get Engine of the Gods when you're down because it's hands down the best. Like Tick, Tehenhauin only has access to one unique mission, excluding Lord Kroak. The Plaque of Sotek is a head-on assault against a huge Skaven army with lots of good units in any category, so it can be very challenging even with an endgame comp. This is one of those battles where you really need to make use of all the spells and abilities you can to make sure you're giving your units the best chance you can. It's also a good idea to hold your line and avoid getting flanked if you can help it, as a huge number of the enemy will be hard to withstand. The reward you get is the Plaque of Sotek, and it gives public order to all provinces, as well as some magic and passive abilities in battle. The Red-Crested Skink Chief is our first non-legendary lord and comes with 3 options of mounts, a Horned one, a Ripidactyl, or an Ancient Stegodon. In battle, they're armor piercing with a bonus against large as well as having the poison effect. This makes them excellent at taking on other mounted lords and some monsters, as they will be able to do good damage while also debuffing the enemy. They also are aquatic, so shouldn't have to worry about getting across the battlefield across any terrain. They don't have any spells, but do have the abilities Foe Seeker and Warrior's Crest. When levelling them, it follows the standard rules, but this time you want to go for the Warrior's Crest line after red, as it will give your army a few more bonuses. Of course, since these guys aren't legendary, you always want to get immortality as soon as possible to ensure you don't lose all of your hard work of levelling them. And of course, you want to get whichever mount you prefer as soon as you can afford, but I'd always try and wait for the Stegodon. The Saurus Oldblood is next up, and he's the real bruiser lord of the Lizardmen. He has 2 options of mounts, a Cold One or a Carnosaur, and has the abilities Foe Seeker and Stand Your Ground. They're armoured and shielded, so can take quite a bit of damage in battle against a variety of damage types. They also deal AP damage, so can go against some really tough units just by themselves. Finally, they also have predatory sensors, so will be able to detect any enemies that try to sneak up on you. When levelling them, it's basically the same as Kroq, Route Marcher and Redline, then choose a blessing once you can to give the faction some buffs. Once you get to level 20, it's worth saving 2 points to get Honoured Elder and Immortality as soon as possible. Finally, you should go for the Yellow Tree and whichever mount you prefer to improve the lords themselves. The Slann Mage Priests are the final lords available to the Lizardmen, and they come in 3 varieties, and the only difference is the magic they can cast. They have no mounting options, but do share the abilities Greater Arcane Conduit, Shield of the Old Ones, and Banishment. The High Priest gets the ability Shield of Sapphire and can access the Law of High Magic. The Light Priest has the ability Exorcism and can access the Law of Light. Finally, the Heavens Priest has the ability Roiling Skies and has access to the Law of Heavens. They all level the same way, with the obvious Route Marcher and Redline to start. The Eldritch line is a good next step to get some great abilities without using magic winds. Finally, get any spells you can to make use of the mage spellcasting as much as possible, and of course, get immortality as soon as possible. Lord Kroak is our one legendary hero from the Lizardmen. He's basically a little older Slann Mage Priest with access to some unique spells. He has no mount options, but does have the abilities Arcane Conduit and Supreme Shield of the Old Ones. He also has the spells Deliverance of Itza 1, 2 and 3, which cause explosions which aren't harmful to your units and do gradually more damage for gradually more cost. He also has extremely good melee attacks that cause AoE explosive damage. In campaign, he can be used to boost income and stimulate growth, and if embedded in an army, he can choose to either train units or replenish them. Leveling him is unique, as no one really has access to the same sorts of skills. You want to start with getting all 3 of the Deliverance of Itza spells, as they are super strong and will help so much in battle. It can be useful to get all the passive effects down the same tree as well as a Supreme Shield of the Old Ones, as it's great at buffing troops. The first spawning ability is super useful if he ever finds himself in melee, and the Unfathomable tree will be a massive help. I choose to use his training ability, so I upgrade that whenever I can, but if you decide to use him outside of battle, then the entirety of his blue tree is really great, especially for destroying walls and de-leveling settlements. Kicking off the non-legendary heroes are the Skink Priests. They come with the option of 4 mounts, a Pterodon, a Stegodon, an Ancient Stegodon, and an Ancient Stegodon with Engine of the Gods. The only difference between the 2 options is the abilities and the spells they can cast. The Beasts Priest has the ability Wild Heart and has access to the Lore of Beasts, and the Heavens Priest has the ability Roiling Skies and has access to the Lore of Heavens. They also level the same, as you should go for the spells first before upgrading the scouting ability to get more magic items for all your characters. You should always get immortality as soon as possible, and your mount of choice as soon as you can afford it. all heroes in the faction can detect Skaven undercities, so I won't bother reading it out every time. In campaign, these guys can be used for cleansing corruption, stealing tech, wounding enemy heroes, and blocking enemy armies. If embedded in a Lord's army, they increase the chances of finding magical items post-battle. I do choose to keep these guys with Lords as much as I can though, as the spells are very useful for supporting melee Lords. Skink Chiefs are up next, and they are the assassins of the Lizardmen roster. They have 3 options at mount: a Pterodon, a Stegodon, or an Ancient Stegodon. In battle, they have poison attacks and can fire whilst moving, so can be useful for sneaking around to get hits on enemy Lords, but battle isn't the way I'd recommend them. They only have access to one ability, Slippery, and in campaign, they can boost income, damage walls, assassinate enemy heroes, and hinder enemy army replenishment. When embedded in an army, they speed up army replenishment. When leveling them, you have 2 options, campaign or battle focus. The campaign build will focus on blue skills, starting with Specialist and Assassinate. Once you've cleared the blue tree, then the rest are basically useless, except Immortality, which is always essential. The battle build will focus on the yellow tree to improve many of the unit's stats in battle, as well as offering various mounts. It's also worth upgrading replenishment to ensure armies are ready for anything, and as usual, get Immortality as soon as possible. The Saurus Scar Veteran is our final Lizardmen hero, and he's the melee captain of the roster. He has access to 2 mounts, a Cold One and a Carnosaur, and in battle they're armoured and shielded, as well as dealing anti-large armour-piercing damage, so are amazing at taking on Lords or huge units often by themselves as duelists. They do benefit from being supported by melee units as they provide encourage buffs, but can do just fine by themselves. They have access to the abilities Foe Seeker and Deadly Onslaught, and in campaign they can spread public order, assault garrisons, wound enemy heroes, and assault units. When embedded in an army, they provide training for units to get them some stat buffs before they even see combat. Leveling them is quite standard for a hero of this type. Training should be upgraded whenever you can so that your Lord's units can be as elite as possible by the time they see combat. The yellow skills are always a good bet to make these guys even better in combat, and once you get a preferred mount, they're almost a one-man army. And as usual, you should always get Immortality. Thanks for watching this section of my Lizardmen guide. If you want to check out the other parts, there's a link in the card and in the description for a playlist of the series. Don't forget to vote in the poll for the next race you want me to make a guide for, which is linked in the description and the comments. If you enjoyed this video at any point, please consider leaving it a like, as it really does help out a lot, and if you want to see more of this type of video, make click that subscribe button so you stay up to date. After all, it is free. For now though, I was COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.